I'm Evie and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing how I got a Band 6 in HSC Biology and how you can too. I'm going to be sharing some advice on how to write effective study notes, how to study efficiently, how to tackle challenging practice questions, and I'll also be providing some specific advice for each module in biology. Make sure to stick around until the end because I'm going to be sharing some crucial advice on how students miss certain marks and how to avoid this. Let's get into it. My first tip is to have an open-minded and passionate approach to biology. Biology isn't just about memorization, it's about understanding processes and why and how they happen and for what purpose. Once you shift your mindset to one of memorization to one of understanding, it makes studying so much more enjoyable as you're curious about the subject matter and want to actually understand why and how it happens. This also benefits you so much more in exams, as you often can't just regurgitate information, as you have to apply it to a new and unfamiliar stimulus. Be prepared to dedicate extra time to biology. It is a very content-heavy subject, but if you are passionate about it and interested in the subject, it makes it so rewarding, really enjoyable, and I promise your hard work will pay off. My second tip is to use the syllabus as a guide. It seems pretty self-explanatory, but by actually regularly checking your syllabus and seeing where you are in it, it really helps you stay up to date and organized with your study. I like to print mine out and keep it handy as I completed the content in class, as I like to tick each dot point off and make some slight annotations on there just so I was familiar with the content in my examples. It's really important that you base your study notes off the syllabus dot and dash points, which I'll get onto soon, and it just really ensures that you're staying on track and all your information that you're including is relevant to what could be in the HSC. It's also really important to highlight key verbs in the syllabus. You may not actually notice this, but at the start of each dot point and dash point, it'll have a verb, such as explain, analyze, or identify. This then alludes to how much detail you need to include in your study notes, as it indicates the range of marks that an exam question could be. For an example, an identify dot point may only require you to recognize and name something, but if you have to justify something, be prepared for an exam question up to 8 marks. My third tip is to create your own effective study notes. In biology, it's really important that you include a great balance of detail and succinct summaries in your notes, as I said before, there is a lot of content, but you have to go into detail while summarizing as well. Avoid spending too much time perfecting your notes, as it is not the most effective form of studying. They should be clear, concise, and easy to read when you come back in the future, and they should just be a tool for you to help revise instead of your sole source of studying. For my biology notes, I typed mine and made them on Google Docs, and I did a different doc for each module. I highly suggest you do a variety of formats for your notes by using dot points, tables, diagrams, and images, as biology isn't just about, a whole lot of information. In exams, you're going to be presented with flowcharts, diagrams, images, and you really need to be familiar with these and be flexible in how you present your information, as in exams, you can present your information in a table, and it's really helpful to put it like this in your notes, so that it's easy to remember and you're also familiar with that format. Another top tip is to use color coding. In my notes, I did all my examples in orange and key scientific terms in pink. That way, when I looked through my notes, it was easy to recognize these terms, and it also really made me more inclined to remember to put examples in my notes and remember to use scientific terminology. Another top tip is to use definitions in your notes. In biology, you have to define every key term in a question, and I'll get to this later when I come to talking about how to write an exam response. But definitions are everything. So underneath each dot point, I always included a definition and would then go into my notes. A key thing that makes Band 6 students stand out is examples. Real-world applications and case studies are so essential for every single dot point in biology. This may seem overwhelming because how are you supposed to have an example for everything? But there is a lot of overlap in the content between modules, and you can use examples for, a variety of different concepts. For me, in terms of genetic mutations, I always referred to sickle cell anemia. To this day, I still remember that it's a missense base substitution point mutation. You just never forget those examples, and I used it in every single exam response that required me to mention a genetic mutation. Often, the top band of a response requires an example, and it's easy to forget these, but by including them in your notes all the time, you'll never forget to put them into an exam response. Another thing that makes Band 6 students stand out is that they use a variety of resources, and this is so essential to get a variety of perspectives on a piece of content and to also find those unique examples that make you stand out. Personally, I used my class notes, of course, to make my notes, and I also used Atomi, which was a paid resource that my school had. I also used ATAR Notes, which I paid for myself, and it provided a really good biology summary. You can get a printed copy or an online copy, but I highly recommend that one as well. But there's also plenty of free resources such as Conquer HSC, which provides great summaries too, and I also used my biology textbook and Blitzing Biology. My next tip is to make and use flashcards. This is so essential for biology because with the amount of content, it can seem impossible to review it all before an exam. I made my flashcards right after I made my notes, and about a page of notes translated to about one flashcard, and it just had all the top essential information that I needed to know. Before an exam, I would not sit there and read over my whole notes for that module, but rather I would go through my entire deck of flashcards to make sure that I had reviewed all the content, but in a time-efficient manner. I made my flashcards online using Quizlet, but you can either do physical flashcards or online ones. It's totally up to you, but I just found it more efficient as I could, star the flashcards that I needed to come back to, and I could do them even when I was outside of the house if I just needed some quick revision. In the library before school, sometimes I would go through my biology flashcards on Quizlet just in my mind, reciting the answers to really just get my brain going at the beginning of the day. And on weekends, if I had some spare time, I would go through my flashcards as well, as just frequently going over that content can make such a huge difference and makes you so much less likely to forget it when exam time comes. The most important method of studying in biology is practice questions, and if you do practice questions frequently, I can guarantee that you'll stand out against other students. Practice questions are the best form of studying because it replicates exactly what you'll do in an exam, and especially with biology, the practice questions can be so different to what you actually learn in class because it's more about applying the content that you've learned rather than just restating or regurgitating it. Once I finished a concept in class, completed my study notes, and completed my flashcards, I'd then find a relevant HSC question online to that content that I just did, and I'd print it out and attempt it. I found this so important as you do it as you go, rather than just saving practice questions right for before the exam, when it can seem so overwhelming and you have so many questions, which can just really add to the stress. I always handwrote these questions and marked them immediately in a different color, and if I made any mistakes, I would write this down in a mistakes book. I've mentioned this in other videos, but I had this book here which has a bunch of different subjects in it, and every single time I made a mistake when writing a practice question or even in an exam, I would come to this book, write down the mistake I made, and reattempt the question. That way I wouldn't make that same mistake again. And before every exam, I would just sit down, read over this book and review it to make sure that I learn from my mistakes properly. In biology, marking questions yourself can sometimes be challenging, as the marking guidelines written by NESA are just a guide for markers to use, and it may not be an actual example of a full, 8 out of 8 response. So to combat this, I often handed in questions to my teacher, and I'm sure they'd be more than willing to mark these questions if they aren't busy, as it really shows that you're taking that initiative to hand in those questions and try your best. My next tip is that you have to learn how to actually master and properly answer biology exam questions. Biology is different to every other subject in terms of how you're supposed to respond to short response questions. Before answering any biology question, you have to first do 3 things. Look at the verb, look at the key terms, and make a plan. It's really important that you get familiar with the NESA verbs, as it really indicates how much detail you have to put into your response and how you actually have to structure your response. For example, if your verb is compare, you have to make sure that you include both similarities and differences of 2 concepts in your response. If it's justify, you have to support an argument or conclusion. If it's explain, you have to relate cause and effect. If it's identify, you just have to recognize and name. It makes such a difference when you look at the verb and know exactly what you have to do, and it does take a little bit of memorization. Next, you have to identify the key terms in the question. There can be multiple key terms, but often there's something like mutations, gene pool, genetic drift, genetic technology, DNA, alleles, anything of that sort. You have to underline those and just really make sure you keep them in your mind, and the first thing you must do in your response is define them. If you just spend 1 or 2 sentences defining those key terms, you are guaranteed marks, and if you forget to put in these definitions, you're missing out on that top band and you're guaranteed to lose marks, which is so devastating because you can write the best response and know exactly what you're talking about, but if you just forget that 1 sentence definition, that's it. I know, so easy to forget, but just really make sure that you keep that in mind. You're also going to want to make sure that you plan your response before you write the whole thing. It's really important that you just write down what examples you want to talk about, any keywords that pop in your mind, and just make a general plan, especially for those extended responses, so that you don't go off track and just start writing something random and realize that you could have used your time better in an exam. In exam questions, I like to follow a general structure, which was a definition, explain the concept, give an example, and then link it back to the question. So it's kind of like peel but deal. Of course, every question is different, but I found that including those key concepts always helped me stay on track. Another great thing that I suggest is looking at how Band 6 students write and respond to exam questions to see how they do it and to get a general idea of how you can do it yourself too. NESA releases exam workbooks every year on a HSC exam and includes like scanned images of sample responses from top achieving students, and I found these so helpful to look at. My school had these in the library, which I just borrowed, or you can order them online, or you may be able to find a free version online somewhere, maybe on HSC or something of that sort. But it's really helpful to use, as you can really just see what they did, why they got the top mark, and really just see the kind of structure they use, and you can try to apply that in your own questions as well. My next tip is to make sure that you pay enough attention to your working scientifically skills. These often come up in exams when we don't expect them, and it's really important that you're prepared. You should frequently practice drawing graphs and the right type of graphs, such as how do you know to draw a line graph or a column graph. So it's just really important that you know the difference between these, spend time studying your working scientifically skills and practice drawing them really accurately as well. And also this is really important for your Punnett squares, your pedigrees, and also interpreting pedigrees comes up so often too, and that's often a challenge, and I know I find that challenging as well. So watching videos online like on YouTube really helped me kind of decode those as well, and also making sure you know the difference between your independent, dependent, and controlled variables, and the difference between validity, accuracy, and reliability. Now, for those of you in Year 12, I wanted to talk about some specific advice for each module and certain tips that help you achieve well. In Module 5, you're introduced to a lot of new biological processes, and as I said at the start of the video, it's really important that you actually understand how these work and the purpose of, all the enzymes, all the hormones, all the proteins, what they all do, and it's really important that you don't just focus on memorizing and you really just think about how it works and why it works. For these processes, I really suggest doing flashcards, as it helped me kind of understand and really just help with that active recall. But these processes consist of, fertilization, mitosis, meiosis, DNA replication, transcription and translation in polypeptide synthesis, and also things such as, inheritance patterns, cell electrophoresis, DNA sequencing, DNA profiling. There's a lot of new things in this module, and I feel like it's one of the larger ones, so it's definitely important that you take that time to really understand those processes as they come up in exams as well. In terms of helping you understand these processes, I really suggest that you first do a blurt out of all the information. I like to do this in color-coded dot points, as you can see here. This is a really good dot point summary that I love for hormones, and then try to translate this into a flowchart. I have an example of one here, but you can draw your own, and I found that if you're just able to take in that information, not look at it, draw a flowchart, it really just shows that you understand the concept, and if you can explain it to someone, you know that you're ready. Module 6 is all about mutations, and once again, it's really important that you know your examples to set you apart from other students and to make sure that you're unlocking those top marks. It's really important that you know the difference between mutations of electromagnetic radiation sources, chemical sources, and naturally occurring sources, and have in-depth examples for each of these, as this comes up in the HSC, as it did in my HSC as well. With these mutations, it's important that you know what they are, what they do to the DNA, and what happens in the body as a result of it. That way, you're not missing any part of your explanation and linking back to the question. A lot of key terms come up in this topic, and it's really important that you have really solid definitions for each of these, as they can seem confusing as they all seem like the same thing, but an exam question could hone in on specifically one, and you need to make sure you have a strong definition. Things such as the gene pool, gene flow, genetic drift, it all seems like the same thing, but they're all different, so make sure you know the difference. This module also goes into biotechnologies, which are really interesting, and make sure that you have a lot of examples for these. I had so many examples because these questions, are often the larger mark responses, as they were in the 2024 HSC as well. And it's really important that you know them from the past, the present, the future, in agricultural fields, in medical fields, ones that are reproductive technologies, and ones that are used, to cure genetic mutations, all those things. There's so many examples that you can use, so make sure that you have enough time to properly wrap your head around this, and it's important that you also know the implications of each ones, the benefits and the limitations of each too. Next, we have Module 7. For me, I actually found this the most content-heavy one. I don't know if that was just me, but I did enjoy it. It was just a lot of content. So you just have to make sure that you know your definitions really well for all of the different types of pathogens, as you can often be asked to distinguish between two different types, and it can be really easy to forget about, the size of a certain one or what distinguishes a feature of one from another. So it's really important that you know that well. And also, as I said before, make sure that you have a lot of real examples of pathogens, how they enter an organism, what they do, how they are transmitted between one organism to another, and all of those things. Next, we also have the immune system, which I found the biggest biological kind of concept in the entire course. And with this, it's so important that you give yourself enough time to wrap your head around it. I remember first learning about it and feeling overwhelmed, how am I supposed to remember all of this? But like everything in biology, it just takes some time, and it's really important that you focus on understanding it rather than memorizing it. Make flowcharts, draw diagrams, watch videos. I actually found YouTube videos really helpful for this one, and asking questions in class, even attempting practice questions and handing them in just to see how you'd approach it. And over time, I eventually understood it, and you can too. Another large part of this module is procedures to prevent the spread of a disease, and I really suggest that you have specific examples for these once again and know the benefits and limitations of each, as not all are 100% accurate. And last up, we have Module 8. For this module, it starts off with homeostasis, and I really suggest that you draw feedback loops and flowcharts for, temperature regulation and glucose regulation, as in an exam you can actually be asked to draw these diagrams, or they can be given to you in a multiple choice question. And if you're able to draw those diagrams without looking at any content, it really shows that you actually understand how the stimulus response pathway works. It's also really important that you pay enough attention to studying epidemiological studies. In an exam, you can be asked to critique the effectiveness of one or to design your own, and in an exam, it can seem so daunting to even know where to start, as these questions aren't very common, but when they do come up in a HSC, it's often a larger mark response, so it's important that you know how to tackle them. Honestly, the best way at practicing these is actually just doing the practice questions and handing them into your teacher. Over time, I found that these things here really stood out to me when critiquing the effectiveness of an epidemiological study, so it's really helpful to just look out for these things in those types of questions. But yeah, it is hard to learn how to do these questions in class, as it's more of an exam style thing rather than content. Lastly, it's essential that you go into detail with the eye, the ear, and the kidney. It's really important that you know their structure, their function, what happens when it malfunctions, and how technologies can assist in restoring normal function. To assist with knowing the structure, I really suggest that you label diagrams, and there's even online games where you label the parts of the eye and the ear, which is really good because there can be a lot of parts. Personally, I found learning about the technologies really interesting, but they were a bit of content to remember at times. So flashcards are your best friend in terms of this, as there are so many aspects to, a hemodialysis machine or a cochlear implant. So it's really important that you know these well, as larger mark questions are often on this part of the syllabus as well. As for some final advice, I want to remind you all to trust and enjoy the process. Biology can seem like a lot at times, but if you really focus on understanding the content and how and why it works, it can be so fascinating and really enjoyable. I wanted to remind you all of the importance of consistency, as consistency beats cramming, and it's so much better for your brain when you study in small sections throughout the year instead of just cramming right before an exam, as you're so much less likely to remember the information and write a high quality response. By working on your biology skills every day or every week, it really just makes such a difference in a way that you can't even imagine. And when you look back at the end of year 12, you'll realize just how much you learned from the beginning of year 11. I also really suggest that once again, you use past papers and past questions as much as you can, and frequently seek your teacher for feedback and help. And even just, asking a question in class can save you so much more time at home trying to Google the answer, finding all these different websites, all these sources. It can just be so confusing at times. So, just being brave and asking your teacher a question can make such a difference and really save you in your study time. And that is it for today's video. By following these steps, you guys are on track to achieving your best results in biology, and I'm sending you so much luck. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video or found something valuable out of it, please feel free to subscribe and like, and feel free to comment any questions you have below, as I'd be more than happy to help you guys out. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!